Yeah, so we started on this in about 1991. We were interested in looking at native warm season grasses as a way to create demand enhancement for the farm sector, because there was a crop commodity price collapse, and we had too many farmers, or we didn't have enough markets. So we decided to work on these native warm season grasses as a new bioeconomy, sort of bioenergy crop, and it's been a 30-year journey actually, and we're quite pleased with the progress we're finally making after a lot of struggle. So I'm hoping that the new entrants to this sector find it a lot easier than the early farmers that got into it. So just to give you a bit of an introduction, these native grasses, they evolved in the North American prairie and they cover about 200 million acres, these tall grass prairie plants, like switchgrass and big bluestem. And they have these really deep root systems that really make them drought tolerant and resource efficient. And they're also warm season grasses like corn and sorghum, so they use water efficiently. And in terms of a carbon offset strategy, well, they're really like number one amongst field crops, because they turn over carbon in the roots, and they exude a lot of sugars through the roots, and that feeds soil microbes, and it makes for just a wonderful soil organic matter contribution. And typically, you can get about 3 tons per hectare of offsets from these grasses in 1 year. So why switchgrass for the dairy sector? Well, it can provide a high yielding and reliable supply of quality and affordable biomass. It can be used for hygienic bedding, dry cow feed, or physically effective fiber for milking cows, as was explained a week ago in the dairy seminar. And it's easy for the dairy farmer to plant, harvest, and store. It's just another forage crop. And they've got most dairy farmers would have all the existing expertise and equipment to manage it. So the main problem was that it was not an easy crop to grow. It was basically an unimproved native grass, and there was just a lot of struggle that people had, and dairy farmers will probably say they have enough tasks to deal with in the day. So this was our first experiences. We planted out some acreage with Iogen Corporation, 500 acres in Eastern Ontario in 1999, and then Don Knott put in some acreage. Larger acreage, 325 acres. So there was a lot of pretty dirty looking fields in the fall on our first year fields. So we kept getting the message from farmers like Urs Egeman, who said, you got to fix the establishment, Roger. REAP's got to work on improving switchgrass establishment if we're ever going to make this a real viable field crop. And the very first farmer we grew it with, his name was Harry Wilhelm in Tavistock, Ontario in 1992, and he laughed at the crop. It was so slow getting out of the ground that he was just laughing at our research project. So we really got a tough lesson when the farmers laugh at what you're doing. So it was obvious the crop needed to be domesticated. So we set up a breeding program at that farmer's farm, actually at Harry Wilhelm's farm in Tavistock. That's where we did our first selection cycles, and we used a couple of varieties called Summer and Sunburst, which we've continued with in crosses and in Don's Tecumseh too that he's growing at his farm. So our objective were to develop improved cultivars of switchgrass that were easier to grow and faster to establish and higher yielding. And more recently, we decided that we needed to create a wider maturity range to enable both fall and spring harvest to better supply markets, including the dairy sector. So we started in the greenhouse more recently at McGill University, but actually on farm before that. And we did these annual breeding cycles we evolved. So we used these trays, and we would plant out about 30,000 seeds in perhaps about 1,000 pots. And each year we would end up with 200 plants in the fall that would be put out to the field. In the spring that would be put out to the field. And then we'd gather the seed off of that in the fall. So these plants in front of us are some of our superior seedlings, and they're single tiller emergents, so they can get up and get out from the weeds. And we've continued to do that year after year. And we've some of these materials now we've gone through seven, eight selection cycles. So if you look at the far left, the picture at the bottom on the far left, you can see this is the original cave-in rock that we harvested from an old field in Quebec. And it's basically like it throws out a lot of tillers, and it's kind of like a wild species. There was no selection pressure for switchgrass to develop a good seedling vigor. So we had to breed that in. And then you can see this, the center picture, 9 years later, how that same genetic material through intensive selection pressure has evolved to be more erect, fewer tillers emerging, and just growing, just growing like a field crop. And the plot on the far right, that's one of our Big Rock 2 selections, and we've selected for increased, rather reduced lodging, more leaf erectness, and it's just looking like a field crop. More the morphology of lowland switchgrass, which a lot of breeders in the US have been focused on. So we're in Canada. We can't grow lowland switchgrass very well. It doesn't have as good a forage quality for livestock feeding, for dairy animals, for example. And it's just, it's a more finicky plant to grow. So we focus on these upland switchgrass types that are better forage quality, that are hardier, and that are much easier to grow. And so this is where we've evolved it. We've evolved the seedlings of switchgrass have, exceptional seedling vigor, and we've found better weed control programs to suppress weeds. So we don't like to teach the weeds a lesson. We just like to suppress them and let the crop genetics overwhelm the weeds. And this is actually some Tecumseh 2 that Don Knott has planted out at his farm as well. And so this is actually up in Grey County. This is a first-time grower. This is a farmer that's working with their Sagaman, and getting exceptionally good results in a very tough growing season last year. And so this is a variety called RC Chippewa, and just excellent establishment in Class 3 farmland. So, it can be done on less than best lands, and it can be done well. And then here we have several of our stars that were up before me, Don Knott and Ron Tunders, and Normand Caron, the first farmer in Eastern Canada to plant switchgrass and stay with it. And Normand Caron, he started in 1997 with us, and he's a seed grower growing several new varieties. So these are outstanding fields of switchgrass, but they're not exceptional. This is the kind of results that most farmers should be able to get with new genetics and a good program. And this is actually a video. This is a first-time switchgrass grower. Many of you that are experienced dairy farmers might know this gentleman. It's Todd Nixon from just south of Ottawa. So it's October the 9th, 2020, and I'm with Todd Nixon, and we're in a first-year seeding he has of Big Rock switchgrass. And Todd, I was just wondering how you would be using this switchgrass.
So our intentions when we planted it was to have control over a low potassium forage source for dry cows. But we also feed a lot of straw to our lactating diets for effective fiber, and we bed our dry cows on a bedding pack, so we use a lot of straw there. So we'll use it in one of those three ways, or maybe all three.
Yeah, and what are you thinking about this first year stand?
I guess we're happy with the establishment. It was a tough year with the drought to get good establishment and good weed control. But you can see now that the other weeds are dying off. You can see where the green is, that the switchgrass has come through pretty good.
Well, I think for a first year switchgrass grower in a tough season, you did an excellent job here.
Thank you.
Okay, good luck with it, Todd.
Thanks.
So yeah, that was Todd Nixon, and he's on a really tough soil that has a lot of winter kill when he grows perennial forages. So switchgrass is one of the very few perennial forages that he should be able to grow. So we've done a lot of intensive breeding effort, and we've done morphological selection. We didn't have the budget to go into high-tech breeding, and switchgrass is such an undeveloped species. It's easy to make progress with conventional breeding approaches. So we've done a lot of intensive morphological selection, meaning just looking at plant traits like leaf erectness, leaf width, the height of plants, tillering. And we focused on that, and we run a numbers game. And we've been very successful with these annual breeding cycles to dramatically change the morphology of the plant and the productivity. So this is actually our partner, Serum, just south of Montreal, and they're doing long-term performance testing trials on the new switchgrasses that we're working with. And we have another video. This is actually at Serum, and we're going to walk through the plots. So it's July 7th, 2020, and we're in Serum in Saint-Anne-Beloy, Quebec. And that's Blue Jacket. And that's Chippewa. And that's Sunburst. And that's an experimental cross. And that's Big Rock 2. And that's another experimental cross, which we call RC Sundance. And that's Cave and Rock. And that's an experimental cross, late maturity. And that's Summer. And this is the selection Tecumseh, selected out of Summer. So quite a nice grouping of new selections here with this selection here being the Big Rock 2, which is really popping as quite a nice new material. And the other one that was really popping was the this one beside it. That's the what we call Sundance, and that's early maturity and looking quite nice. Quite a nice canopy on both of these. Erect, wider leaves, blue-green color. Just really interesting. And if we compare that with the border, and our border plots here are cute. You can see this is much more planophile, not erect, and not a well-organized canopy. So we're seeing huge differences between the new selections and Cave and Rock, which is the main variety that's been planted in eastern Canada. So just to give you an idea that it's just a little bit like corn production. The later the maturity you have on the switchgrass, the more solar energy you intercept. And so if we can grow later maturity materials like the Big Rock 2, it'll grow for about 9 days longer in the fall and produce more biomass. So that type of material we can't harvest in the fall, but we can cut it and bale it in the spring for example, for dry cow feed. And the ones that are in the center those are earlier maturing materials, and we've improved those. We're setting those up for fall harvest. So we fall mow, fall bale, like Don Knott showed. So we've got various options. And if you're in Ohio, you can grow some later maturity materials and get them off in the fall, or Southern Ohio or Iowa. But if you're in Northern Quebec, you probably want stuff that's pretty hardy to do fall mow, spring bale. And these are what some of our new nursery plants look like. So we've completely changed the morphology from a floppy leaf plant of upland switchgrass to something that many people would look at and say that's got to be lowland switchgrass. It's blue-green in color. It's tall. It's got reduced tillers, and it's got wide erect leaves. So we've been looking at miscanthus and lowland switchgrass as model crops in terms of they're better crops for intercepting sunlight. But we really like the hardiness and the easy growing conditions that upland switchgrass give us for most farmers. And so what we've done is we've tried to extend the quality of the genetic material that we have right across the board. So between our earliest material, which is one called Blue Jacket that we have under trial in South Dakota that's performing quite well, all the way to Big Rock 2, you got about a 25-day difference in maturity. And then there's several in between that are probably excellent for fall harvesting, like the Tecumseh 2, and the Sundance. And then we have the Chippewa and the Big Rock 2 for fall mow spring bale, or if you could grow Chippewa as a fall harvest in a place like Iowa. So what we were trying to do is really understand this whole physiological maturity, when the plant reaches like a soft to hard dough stage in the seed, kind of turns yellow-green, starting to dry down naturally. We know that if we mow it at that time at about a 6-inch height, we're not going to damage that plant. It's had enough of a growth cycle that it's going to store enough carbohydrates to get through the winter. So we like this idea of having several windows for harvesting to improve the supply system for both bioeconomy markets and for dairy farmers. And here again, this is Don's Big Rock. I think this was around the 20th of July. Just a remarkable looking field. Best switchgrass I've seen for upland switchgrass anywhere. And Don's just doing a really good job. He's got a productive soil, and there's some pretty good genetics in that material. So this is for dairy farmers to understand how this fall mow spring bale system works. So they would mow it in the fall, potentially late October, or early November, as Don said. And then they overwinter it in windrows. You can see the snows on it in the bottom right. And then you would spring bale it. And the beauty for the dairy farmer is they want low potassium feeds for their dry cows, as Gail and her associates explained so well a week ago. So low potassium is really ideal for us, for dry cows. And this material, if we can get it off on good land, like Don says, that's easy to access in the spring, well, it's just really high quality feed for dry cows. And then this is the same photo that Don showed earlier. Third week of September, you can see up the hill a little bit. The switchgrass is going yellow-green. It's pretty much on physiological maturity, and we're pretty certain, based on some studies we've seen and based on some observations we've seen, as long as the grass reaches physiological maturity, we've got very low risk of harming it in terms of production or winter kill. And this is a great product potentially for physically effective fiber. And if we if we're doing a 4 or 5 year rotation cycle on these grasses, we can actually cut it in July and use it in the milking cow ration and have a better quality product, and potentially still fill that role of a physically effective fiber without having the material so slow to degrade in the rumen. So some of the needs we need to do more performance trials to help document the distinct characteristics of these cultivars for us to get them registered to Plant Breeders' Rights. We have 2 of them registered in the program already, and we expect to have 2 more registered this year. And then potentially it would help and give incentives, if we could get incentives for establishment for farmers, or even carbon offset payments. Federal government's got a program for 2 billion trees to be planted, and grasses are so much more efficient, so much cheaper to plant, so much faster the carbon offsets, and not going to burn down in a fire. You're not going to burn away that stored carbon in a fire. So we think that there's a real need to get these native prairie grasses as part of a carbon offset program as well. So just some of the things that we did with this KTT program. 2 years ago, we had a field day at Don Knott's, and this was just excellent for people to get out there and see these new materials in the field and how they are like quite dramatically different than the old materials we used to grow. We've done quite a bit of work with Ontario Biomass Producers Cooperative, having focus group discussions. We've done some educational videos and management guides. And here are some of those materials. So what we're trying to do is document and deepen farmers' knowledge, and with the scientists working with farmers, it's really like excellent in terms of fostering innovation, because we all deepen our knowledge, and it helps the whole process of social interaction is really helps foster innovation. So we have a 90-page guide, the comprehensive guide to switchgrass management, that we're renewing and putting in our latest information. And then there's an excellent guide that we have on switchgrass for poultry and dairy bedding. And there's some videos that you can link in right into that manual. So in summary, we're feeling quite confident that switchgrass is poised to become a field crop for dairy farmers. That there's been excellent breeding progress that's been made to make the crop like a reasonable crop for farmers like Todd Nixon and Ron Tunders to grow as dairy farmers. And what we're seeing is that probably these early maturing varieties can be fall harvested, and they might be preferred for lactating cows for physically effective fiber. And the later maturing varieties that are fall cut and spring baled, they may be better suited for dry cows or bedding. And I'd like to thank our funding partners for our breeding program. Our biggest funder right now is Agriculture Canada and Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, but we also have some core partners, including Serum and Ontario Biomass Producers Cooperative. The Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food has some other projects that we're involved in, and the University of Guelph. And then we have 5 universities that we're partnering with in the US to test these grasses. So it's really giving us some really valuable information for making recommendations for where these grasses can be grown successfully in the US. So thanks very much for your attention. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Yeah, we do. Thank you, Roger. And that was a great presentation. I enjoyed seeing all of the different varieties there. So we do have some time for questions, and I might actually make this more of a chat in terms of that we still have Ron, Scott, and Don with us as well, and now Roger. So perhaps we could maybe address some of the questions that came up at the end of the panel. If you have a question you want to ask in person, you can hit the raise hand in reactions, and we'll go from there. And you can also add those into the chat. So Gail, would you mind reading off some of the questions that were at the end of the panel?
Yeah, sure. The first one we have here is any experiences you guys have with growing switchgrass in an organic situation? Or that you're aware of? Well,
the one experience we had was with about a 80-acre field of Big Rock last year around Guelph, and Norm, what's Norm's last name, Don?
Richardson.
Yeah, Norm Richardson, the vice president of the Ontario Biomass Producers Cooperative. He contracted some land, and it was in alfalfa hay the year before. The farmer didn't want pesticides, and he planted the Big Rock. He had a really nice establishment, and that worked. So it can be done. And we've had some messy fields on organic farms, but we think that we've got some new genetics that can really make a difference in terms of making it a viable crop for organic producers.
I'll add just a bit to that, Roger. You nailed it there. I think the new genetics, or the new varieties, are going to really help with that from the organic standpoint. The experience that I have helping people establish and manage them organically was that, the tools you're left with generally are tillage and or mechanical means for competition control, and those generally lead to a lot of annual competition. So if you're managing organically, again, you got to look to what you had in the fields, what you anticipate in the fields. Following tillage is usually a flush of organics, or annual weeds that are going to pose a lot of competition early, and you're going to have to then address them accordingly with your other means that you have in the toolbox, which are generally going to be mechanical means. So I did have some experience growing my personal fields of switchgrass by choice organically for a number of years, and found that In reality, I managed a field for probably 70% of its life organically without any chemical inputs, both herbicide and fertilizer, and it performed very well. So it is possible. You just have a different set of tools at your disposal, and you need to use them accordingly, and in most cases a little bit more judiciously to make sure you're addressing the issues. But it's possible.
All right, thank you for that. We also have a question from Will about the new varieties, asking how many pounds per acre do you use?
Well, Don, do you want to answer that?
Well, again, it's going to depend on your soil type, your climate conditions. We normally recommend 8 to 10 pound. The variety Tecumseh and Tecumseh 2 is a smaller seed, so there's more seeds per pound. If it's got good germination qualities, you could maybe cut back a bit. The Big Rock and Big Rock 2 are larger seeded, so less seeds per pound. So we would recommend more like 10 pound for those types of varieties.
All right, any other questions from the group? I don't see any more in the chat. We've had some really great discussion here today, and you know, as long as we have so many experts in the virtual room with us, I encourage you, if you want to pick their brains a little bit more, to either leave a comment in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand.
I have a question for Don about killing it. He talks about plowing. We're 100% no-till scenario. If you wanted to kill a field without plowing it, when would you spray it? Or you said Roundup doesn't affect it all that much?
That's a very interesting one, Ron. I've had some indirect experience with this. I had a farm up in the Goderich area that I planted in 2011. I got it to the 3-year stage, and it was a rented farm, and I lost the farm to another farmer who outbid me for the property. He came in and he planted no-till soybeans into that field the next spring, not knowing what he was dealing with. After 5 applications of Roundup, he still had switchgrass. He still had switchgrass in the 3rd year, believe it or not, particularly around the headlands and things like that. He still had switchgrass growing in a no-till situation. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because to me, you're going to have to cut it early, like herd it, August, take it off for hay, then come back and spray it in the fall with Roundup after it's growing back. And then you're going to come back with Roundup again in the springtime, and hopefully you're going to knock it down. But it's tough. There's no question about it. Like I've sprayed switchgrass with like a 1/4 inch sprout and absolutely no damage to it. So you're going to have to hit it hard and hit it at the right times. Personally, you know, I use the plow, of course, and we've had good success at that by and not having to spray it. Just go in the fall and turn it right over. Use a plow that cuts it right off, has a shear that's wider than the moldboard, cuts everything right off and flip it right over. If you bury the crown in switchgrass, she's likely done. And the only time I ever seen anything come back was on the strikeout. So if you're using a rollover plow where you have no strikeouts, you're mint. And then if you plant a crop of, say, Roundup Ready soybeans or Roundup Ready corn, you're done. Switchgrass is done. It's not going to show again. But yeah, no-till is a tough situation, Ron. Yeah, I admit.
If I plow, it means I have to pick stones.
Yeah, okay. that can be a problem.
I think
I'm getting
Don's,
allergic to that.
the only thing I would add to Don's comments is that, like, if you can shave it as close to the ground as possible in early August, you're really going to exhaust it. And I would have confidence that that system's going to work. Calvin Ernst, he routinely kills it with 2 sprays into corn. So it can be done. I think you just don't want to go too early. You got to let the grass regrow and then nail it. But exhaust it. You know, you got to use all the strategies. If you got a tough job, you have to have a comprehensive approach to dealing with it.
Okay, it looks like Mahendra has a question. So if you can unmute and ask a question.
Thank you, Marlene, and all the panel members. It's an excellent presentation as well as discussion. So I have one question as well as 2 questions, actually. First one for Ron. Ron, you mentioned you had about 50 acres of switchgrass for a 125 cow dairy farm. I just want to know if you want to replicate a similar type of for another dairy producer. So what type of recommendation you would say, like in the same size of 100 or 125 or 150 dairy, is that size of operation will be reasonable, like about 50 acres of switchgrass with the yield I think you mentioned about 3 tons per acre at your area. So how much you would think for bedding, or how much it will go for feed in that? Just give some idea.
It depends on your dairy barn. We bed in the stalls, and we have bedding packs for fresh cows. We bed pretty lightly with heifer on the heifer's side. I'm pretty confident that we can get away with the 50 acres. Lots of dairy farmers around here use sand, so that'd be for bedding for the dairy cows. I think you would have lots of straw if you're using sand. So yeah, I think 50 acres is going to do it. Okay. We're feeding about 50, about half of it in the ration and half of it is used for bedding. So
yeah, okay, thank you. And the second question I have is either Don or Roger. So for early harvesting, like in September, early harvesting mature varieties. So how do you see the potassium level when compared to the fall harvest and winter mode? Potassium levels, early harvesting mature varieties.
Maybe I'll handle that, Don. We did some potassium studies, and because we were working a lot on combustion, trying to reduce potassium for getting good combustion processes happening. And like early maturing materials will start to lose their potassium in the fall. So they, like Ron, for example, I think your material this fall was 0.4% potassium. Normally it might be about 0.7 or 0.8. And if it's overwintered, it'll be down below 0.1, be often 0.05. So if you have an early maturing material that gets a little bit of rain before it's harvested, it's going to be probably below 0.5. So, not a bad material for dry cows, but not as good as spring harvested.
Okay. Thanks, Roger.